You will always be 0% prepared. When it happens, it's a total shock. We spent the first 6 days hiding under a table before a rocket exploded in our living room. We were the last 10 people in the whole neighborhood. We couldn't find anyone to take us out. We were told to walk through the gunfire. We walked for 6 nights. During the day, we slept under trees in the shade of rocks. There were many children with us. Some did not even have shoes. We had to drink any foul water we found in puddles or canals. I was pregnant and vomiting. These are some of the stories of the people who made it out of Ukraine, Sudan, and Afghanistan alive in the past year. By mid-2022, forced displacement reached 103 million globally. Filippo Grandi, head of the UNHCR, said the number was a record that should never have been set. And yet, that record is soon to be broken. This year, the UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, estimates 117.2 million will be forcibly displaced or made stateless. Refugees leave their homes for a wide range of reasons and are fleeing regions across the globe. In the past year, the war in Ukraine, armed conflict in Sudan, and crises following the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan have driven those numbers even higher. In February 2022, Russia's invasion of Ukraine triggered the fastest and largest displacement of people on the European continent since World War II. As of May 2023, more than 8 million people have fled the country. The EU's past responses have been confusing and disorganized. But on March 4, 2022, the EU enacted its Temporary Protection Directive, granting clear legal status and protection to Ukrainians, including rights to accommodation, education, healthcare, and job market access. Yet by summer 2022, signs of refugee fatigue were showing. As resources diminished and living costs soared, pushback began to grow, especially in Poland and the Czech Republic, where many Ukrainian refugees have fled. Ukraine's refugees have sought safety for less than 2 years, while Afghanistan's refugee crisis spans generations, with residents enduring and fleeing foreign invasions, civil war, insurgency, and Taliban rule. In August 2021, the Taliban stormed the capital, Kabul, and retook control of the country, sparking a new exodus of refugees. Since mid-2021, nearly 90,000 Afghan refugees have arrived on American soil, the largest settlement effort in the U.S. in decades. But 2 years later, many are stuck in limbo, relying on temporary visas while waiting for Congress to pass legislation that would provide Afghans with permanent housing, employment, and schooling. The majority of Afghan refugees have fled to neighboring Iran and Pakistan, of which the latter is now host to 3.7 million Afghans. There, they have received a cold welcome in a country suffering political and economic crises, exacerbated by last year's devastating floods. On April 15, 2023, Sudan became the latest theater of war, as a violent power struggle forced nearly 1.4 million people to leave their homes. Of Sudan's 7 neighboring countries, 5, Ethiopia, Chad, Central African Republic, Libya, and South Sudan, have also undergone conflict and political upheaval in recent years. Sudan once hosted more than 1 million refugees, the second largest refugee population in Africa. Now, thousands of refugees are being uprooted again, some forced to return to the same crises they once fled. In Chad, for example, one of the world's poorest countries, the sudden population surge has doubled food prices. The World Food Program has warned some 2.3 million people now urgently need food, as the country falls into its 4th consecutive year of acute food shortages. Low-income countries host a disproportionate share of the world's refugees, in terms of both population size and available resources. Countries representing 9% of the global population and 0.5% of the world's GDP host 18% of the world's refugee population. This is due partly to a lack of consensus around finding homes for refugees, as well as the fact that many nations undergoing conflict are surrounded by poor neighboring countries where refugees flee. Meanwhile, refugees continue to face resistance and significant hurdles in wealthier nations, including political resistance to welcoming more refugees in Europe and the United States. A recent report by the International Rescue Committee found only 271 Afghans were settled in the EU in 2022. In Britain, hundreds of Ukrainian refugees face homelessness. While the U.S. has directed $76.8 billion to Ukraine in aid, only 5% of that amount accounts for humanitarian aid. In order to meet the humanitarian needs of those in Sudan and refugees fleeing to nearby nations, the UN is calling for $3 billion.